Good evening. I'm Akron Mayor Dan Horgan, and I'm excited to welcome all of you to this important community town hall. Tonight, you will have the opportunity to learn more about the 4 candidates vying to be the next chief of the Akron Police Department. Each of these finalists brings years of experience and knowledge to the table. All have worked as police officers and executives in a variety of departments. We've worked with a national consultant on this search process, someone who has experience working with dozens of other cities in similar searches. And after meeting with our community stakeholders and advocates, the consultant said he was uniquely impressed with Akron's potential to succeed, both because of the willingness of our police department to adapt and our community's commitment to support the police in building more accountability and transparency. Akron has a dedicated police force made up of officers and leaders who want to advance safety and build trust. But as we've seen, expectations and demands on police are changing rapidly. Like many cities across the nation, Akron also faces significant challenges related to violent crime as well as strained community trust. Our next chief must value transparency, inclusion, and communication, and be prepared to drive change where needed. They will also need to have the trust of our sworn officers, as their decisions directly affect the lives of our officers and their families. Tonight is about our entire community having the opportunity to learn more about these finalists. At the beginning of our search, we put out a community survey to ask about the most pressing issues facing the Akron Police Department and what they should focus on. We also put a call out for questions for tonight's town hall. Many of the questions you will hear presented to the candidates came directly from our Akron residents. The responses were loud and clear. Our community wants a police force that looks like them, respects them, and protects them. And our next chief must understand, value, and meet the expectations of the citizens we serve. We are fortunate to have a distinguished member of the community here tonight as a facilitator. Coach Kemp Boyd, Executive Director of Love Akron. Thanks, Kemp. We also have our City Press Secretary and Senior Strategic Counsel, Ellen Lander-Nish, to help keep things running smoothly.
Thank you, Mayor Horgan. And once again, welcome to all our viewers at home. We appreciate you joining us this evening as we engage in an important community conversation with the 4 candidates seeking an opportunity to serve as Akron's next Chief of Police. As the Mayor mentioned, I'm Ellen Lander-Nish, and I'm Press Secretary and Senior Strategic Counsel for Mayor Horgan and the City of Akron, and I'm honored to represent the city this evening. To get things started, I will give each of our candidates an opportunity to introduce themselves and give a 1 to 2 minute opening statement. We'll go in alphabetical order, and to start, I'd like to introduce Christopher A. Davis. Christopher Davis began his career in law enforcement as a police officer at Arizona State University in 1994. He was then appointed to the Portland Police Bureau, where he has served since 1998. Rising through the ranks, Davis was appointed Deputy Chief of Police in 2019. He has a Bachelor of Science in Justice Studies and a master's degree in Public Safety Administration from Arizona State University and is a graduate of the FBI National Academy. Thank you, and your statement, Chief Davis.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for the opportunity to meet with you today. As she said, I'm Chris Davis, and I am really honored to be a candidate to be your next police chief in Akron. I understand the challenges of policing in a large and urban environment, just given the experience that I have here in Portland. And I have experience dealing with a lot of the issues that we struggle with in a lot of our big cities these days, like violent crime, independent oversight of police, the wellness of our employees, police accountability, community engagement, and building public trust in our communities. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of opportunities to talk about specific issues tonight, but I just want to introduce myself with a little bit of why I'm here. I believe that right now our profession is at a crossroads and that there is a national crisis of confidence in our police. And I think this is something that we have an urgent responsibility to fix in coordination with our communities. I really believe that that is possible. I believe it is possible for our profession to evolve to better meet the needs of our communities. And I think it's imperative that we do so. I don't believe that we should ever be satisfied with the status quo in our line of work. I do believe that it is possible to have accountability and transparency that the public is calling for. And I also believe that's not a zero-sum proposition, and that we can do that while also taking better care of our police officers and helping them stay healthy throughout their careers and enable them to serve us better in our communities. My vision for the Akron Police Department is an organization that works with its community to make Akron the safest city in the United States. And it's a vision of a department that respects and safeguards the rights of everyone that it serves, and a department that is a great place for people to work and where people enjoy coming to work every day and can find joy in that work. I think when I look at Akron from outside, I see a very thoughtful and engaged community. I see a very professional and dedicated police department, and I see a place that is ready to make this vision a reality. And so that's where I'm coming from tonight, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Davis. Next, I'd like to introduce Eric David Hawkins. Boasting more than 30 years of experience in law enforcement, Eric Hawkins began his career at the Southfield, Michigan Police Department. During his time in the force, he earned his bachelor's and master's degrees from Central Michigan University and later earned his Juris Doctor from Western Michigan University, Cooley Law School. From 2012 to 2018, he served as Chief of Police of the Southfield, Michigan Police Department, and he currently serves as Chief of Police in Albany, New York. Chief Hawkins?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure being here, and good evening to those who are watching on live stream. And as it was mentioned, I've been in this law enforcement profession for over 30 years, starting off as a police cadet in 1990 and having an opportunity to serve as a police chief in 2 different cities and 2 different states. And, you know, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I'm a brand new grandfather. And so this is a very exciting time for my family. And I'm intrigued with the city of Akron because Akron is very similar to the cities that I've had an opportunity to serve as chief of police. Progressive, diverse, multicultural, multi-ethnic, with elected officials who value and promote and indeed embrace these concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And police departments that are going through this reform and transformation and reimagining process, a process that is much more challenging now because it must occur amid this devastating convergence of stressors that we're seeing in our urban areas. Things like an alarming increase in violent crimes that we're seeing in some of our cities. Relations between our police departments and members of our minority communities that has degraded. And recruitment and retention issues. You know, we're not doing enough in law enforcement to market our industry to our young people that are our prospective recruits and future police officers. And we're not doing nearly enough to retain those who are already here. These young men and women who are out there on a daily basis, giving their lives and helping others in our communities, you know, blood, sweat, and tears. And so we've got to watch those people as well, let them know that they're valued as well. Very challenging, very complex issues that we're dealing with in contemporary law enforcement. I come as a person that's tested, a person with experience in leading successfully law enforcement agencies during these very challenging and very complex times. And I'm eager to see if my skill set is what the city of Akron is looking for in its next police chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Hawkins, and congratulations on that new grandchild. Next, I'd like to introduce Stephen L. Milet. Stephen Milet began his law enforcement career 32 years ago in Corpus Christi, Texas, after serving in the United States Air Force. He rose through the ranks in Corpus Christi Police Department, serving as lieutenant, captain, police commander of the Office of Accountability, and assistant chief of police. He served as chief of police of the South Lake, Texas Police Department for 3 years. Chief Milet holds a Master of Science in Criminal Justice Leadership and Management from Sam Houston State University, and he currently serves as chief of police of the Bellevue, Washington Police Department. Chief Milet.
Thank you, Ellen. Good afternoon, Mayor Horrigan and members of the Akron City Council, the citizens of Akron, and the men and women of the Akron Police Department. I too am honored and humbled to be in this part of the process as you seek your next chief of police. The introduction that was just shared with you kind of highlighted the 3 organizations and communities I served in. But what it didn't include was the fact that during my 32 years in the police profession, I had the great fortune to serve in communities in very, very diverse communities. Diversity based on race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, political views, socioeconomic conditions, and diversity of thought. I've been in the police executive positions for close to 15 years, 9 of which have been in serving as a chief of police. But folks, I've never forgotten where I came from, what my roots are. As a patrol officer, where most of the citizen officer interaction occurs, and the great responsibility and privilege that officers have as we interact with the public. I have a proven track record of changing systems in need of change, building bridges into all communities, especially communities of color, and increasing diversity in the agencies in which I've led. I haven't done it by myself. Obviously, nobody can do it by themselves. I build coalitions, I build teams. We create together a shared vision that we carry out as one collaborative team. My track record also includes creating culture within the police department that embraces community engagement and where the community policing philosophy permeates throughout the entire organization, all of which to arrive at the destination of the mission, which is to reduce crime, reduce the fear of crime, and enhance the quality of life for everybody who calls the city home. If selected to serve as your next chief of police, I will lead with integrity, morality, and a strong ethical compass. And I will work very, very hard to earn your trust and your confidence. Folks, we're facing, as both the chief and the deputy chief just pointed out, we're facing some really serious issues. Akron's not immune from that. The violence that is occurring and the loss of life is significant and unacceptable. I have a proven track record to reduce crime, especially violent crime. So I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Milet. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our final candidate, Joseph P. Sullivan. Joseph Sullivan served as a member of the Philadelphia Police Department since 1982, where he started as a patrol officer. He held a variety of roles, such as lieutenant on the SWAT team, a commanding officer in the Narcotics Division, and chief inspector in the Counterterrorism Bureau. He holds degrees from St. Joseph's University and Pennsylvania State and has taught at several institutions. In 2017, he was promoted to Deputy Commissioner for Patrol Operations, where he oversaw several units, including neighborhood services and community relations. Chief Sullivan?
You're muted.
You are muted.
Well, good afternoon and thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, members of council. Thank you for the community of Akron. And thank you for the members of the Akron Police Department that are watching. I have had a fantastic career in Philadelphia. I've had the opportunity to command in basically every aspect of policing and command thousands of fantastic men and women, both sworn and professional staff. Our civilians are a very important part of any police agency. I've also had the opportunity to interact and build bridges in a city that is as diverse as Philadelphia and to gain the trust of these various communities. You know, many people have said to me, I don't know why you want to be a police chief at this particular point in time. And I say to them, I can't think of a better time to be a chief of police. You now have the opportunity to have a seat at the table and be part of the conversation as policing now reforms and goes to the next level. It requires leadership, and that leadership has to have experience operating in a city as difficult as Philadelphia that is urged with poverty, high crime rates. I looked at the community survey as to what the people of Akron were looking for in their next police chief. And I really thought it was impressive. We want police to use less force. And that's something I have a great deal of experience in. I'm very proud to say that in the Philadelphia Police Department, they have the lowest use of deadly force of all the top 10 cities in America. They want to end racial disparities, which has always been a top priority here in Philadelphia, of being very proactive and in monitoring how police actions. One thing we know is more police means less crime, but more police, if not carefully deployed and very carefully supervised supervise and monitor can have bad impact on communities of color. I'm very cognizant of that. Community engagement has always been a hallmark of everything I did. No matter what assignment you are in policing, community engagement has to be first and foremost. You cannot be successful at any other aspect of policing without trust and cooperation of the community. And I've also been successful in diversifying my command staffs and as the chief of training, taking actions to make adjustments in the hiring process to diversify the police department in Philadelphia to the point where it is right now. So if I am so fortunate enough to become the police chief of Akron, I promise you a 24/7 commitment, 110% of my energy, but most of all, that I will be listening and asking questions and taking action only after I've gotten your input and I understand your priorities. I understand Akron. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Sullivan, and thank you again to all of our candidates for your opening remarks. I know we're looking very much forward to hearing more from each of you tonight. At this time, I'd like to introduce the facilitator for our conversation, Kemp Boyd. Kemp, or Pastor Coach Boyd, as he's known around Akron, is the executive director of the non-denominational faith organization Love Akron, as well as the pastor of Garden City Church. Kemp is a diligent connector and convener who has forged relationships across our city, including the faith, civic, corporate, and nonprofit communities. He is skilled in public engagement and has experience helping to lead some of our most important community conversations, including serving as the co-chair of the Criminal Justice Subcommittee of the city's Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force. Kemp's mission is to empower those around him to reach their full potential, including the men at Kenmore Garfield High School, where he serves as the head football coach. Kemp and his wife, Stacy, live in Akron with their 6 children. So Kemp will be asking our 4 candidates questions during tonight's conversation based on those questions submitted by Akron citizens like you who are at home watching tonight. On behalf of Mayor Horrigan, we are truly honored to have you with us, Kemp. Thank you for facilitating this conversation. So thank you and welcome.
Welcome. Glad to be with everybody on this evening. Welcome to all of our audience out there in the virtual world, and also to our mayor and also to our city council. Good evening, gentlemen, and we're gonna go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off as soon as possible with this first question. Each of you are candidates from outside of the organization, meaning that there is an already existing infrastructure that has been established. What is the greatest challenges and opportunities for making transformational change as an outsider? And I'm going to start with you first, Chief Hawkins. You're muted.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. One of the biggest challenges coming in from the outside is that the chief is an outsider, and there's a lot of entrenched ideas. There's ways of doing things. There are traditions that are in place, and it's important when you come from the outside to first of all get an appreciation for those traditions and for those things that are important to the people in the organization. And so it's a challenge coming into if a chief has this idea that he or she is going to come in and make some immediate changes and totally turn things around within a short period of time, he or she will realize very quickly that that's something that is not very easily done. And so, but one of the great opportunities of this is that in most of our law enforcement agencies, we really do have good, conscientious people who, when they see a person who comes in and a person that is coming in a respectful way, a person that comes in value and shows right away that he or she values the people in the organization, values that organization and the traditions of that organization. They're open to new ideas. They know that if an outsider comes in, that there will be change. They already know that. But they're looking at how this outside person is going to go about that change. And so I think it's one of the great opportunities is that the sky really is the limit for a person coming in from the outside. If the chief that's coming in can really connect with the people who are there and share a vision for the organization that's shared, that takes input from those in the organization, those from the community, and have the people that are within that organization be a part of that, then there can be some special change that can happen in the organization.
Awesome. Deputy Chief Davis, same question.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And I've had the opportunity just in the last several years to be in the chief's office here in Portland when we had a new chief come from outside. And so I have been on the insight of the organization when this change has come. And that's really given me a lot of insight into the challenges. And she and I work very closely together in the role that I have, and I learned a lot about that. And what I have observed is that usually when a chief comes from outside, and especially in these times in all of our communities, there is this tension between the change and evolution imperative that exists in our communities, and that I wouldn't even say desire, but that need to see change in our organizations. But also, the change is hard on an organization because people fear loss. And so I think for me, the most important challenge to take on right away to start to mitigate that and to start to lead the organization forward is to establish relationships and earn people's trust. And that doesn't mean that we aren't going to call balls and strikes as a chief, but it does mean that I need to respect the organization that I find and the culture that I find, and do everything that I can to understand what that culture really is and not come in with a lot of assumptions about it. And then also try to understand how that organizational culture got to where it is, because there is usually a reason why things are in the organization, even if we need to change them. But I would also say something that it's important for an outside chief never to overlook is the relationship that needs to be built in the community, because you are also coming from outside that community. And so if I become your chief, I'm going to have a lot of work to do in that first 6 months to a year to go out inside and outside the organization, make those connections, spend that time together, and develop those relationships that will be the foundation of the changes that we need to make in the organization.
Awesome. Deputy Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes. Well, first of all, it's a matter of respect. As an outsider, you're coming into a new police department. You have to demonstrate that you respect that. And in Akron, you have a very good police department. It's time to make it a great police department, and that would be my goal. But I would communicate that to the executive staff. Understanding that I'm sure more than a few of those men and women were hoping that they might be the next chief of the Akron Police Department. So I understand there's going to be some resistance and resentment, but I had the fantastic experience of working with Chief Charles Ramsey, and he came to Philadelphia from the outside, and we weren't happy about it. But he engaged with us. He sought our input. He gave us his input. He made us see things through a completely different lens, look at issues differently, show us a better way of doing things. But he did it in a very careful, a very measured and respectful way. And that, for the new chief, is having roundtable discussions, not just with the executive staff, but every level of the organization. That includes your professional staff, your civilian employees, getting their input, finding out what are their priorities, what do they identify as the problems within the organization, and what would they suggest would be the solution to those problems. And of course, doing the same thing with the community. The first 6 months is going to be nothing but meetings and listening, asking a lot of questions, looking at other people's point of view. But the other side of it is, when you come in from the outside, you have a clean slate. You have no favorites. You have no preconceived notions. You're coming in and taking a fresh look at something. And in a lot of ways, there's no doubt in my mind, there's a lot of people within the department and within the community that really see the value of having someone come in and bring a fresh perspective and a fresh set of eyes and ideas to the Akron Police Department.
Thank you very much. And Chief Milet. You're muted.
I even said it to myself, unmute. Coach, thanks for the question. I appreciate it. And, one of the disadvantages of going last is that a lot of great things are said. So I really would echo what my colleagues have shared. The only things that I think I would add to it is that I've done it twice in Southlake and in Bellevue. And my approach that I've used, it echoes what my three colleagues shared. Very first thing I did when I came into the organization, I came into it with a level of humility, because I don't know the organization and I don't know the community. I did as much research as I possibly could in advance of arriving. But from experience, you're not going to know until you actually arrive and you get in the office. And so what I did in the formula I've used twice successfully is I interviewed every employee in the organization, sworn and civilian. I asked them 8 scripted questions to get a kind of an idea of what was going on inside the police department. And then from there, I also interviewed every council member, the leadership team members, and then key community stakeholder groups. It took me a little while to do it, but I got it done. And what it produced for me anyway was a theme rose really quick. And from there, I was able to start framing what I thought the vision would be. Working with my boss and all the stakeholder groups, we created a shared vision. Part of that vision is, for us in both agencies, was this expectation that once you make a certain rank, it's almost like you're in the club. And so I have always kind of rejected that hierarchy in the paramilitary organization. And this is one example of the changes that we made. The chief needs to be working harder than anybody else in the organization. Why? Because the employees on the line have the closest proximity to you, the public. And so I need to be making sure that you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do your job, the equipment, and the support to do your job. And again, 2 minutes is a little condensed for to go through the entire process that I've taken twice. But I made a commitment that I wasn't going to make any changes for the first 6 months unless it was critical, because I listened and I asked questions, as Joe had referred to as well.
Thank you all of our finalists for your answers. Our next question is going to keep up with the theme of, if you will, an outsider. And this question comes from one of our citizens here in Akron named Denise. Is it important to you to live in the city where you will have oversight of its police department? And if hired, do you plan on living in the city of Akron? I'm going to start with you, Chief Milet.
Yes, the answer is yes, absolutely. In Corpus Christi, I lived in the city of Corpus Christi. My children were born in Corpus. And I was very, very connected with the Corpus community. I moved to South Lake, and South Lake is a very affluent community. And it was really difficult to find housing there. And most of my employees as well, was always connected, and I felt connected with the South Lake community, a wonderful community. But I've always felt that you should live in the community in which you serve. I found the same challenge here in Bellevue, where the cost of living is very, very high. In the 6 years that I've been here, I've lived in the city maybe about 2 years. And again, the short answer is yes. If I am selected to be chief of police, I will live in the city of Akron. My hope is that I'm going to attract my children and my grandchildren to the city of Akron. And this is where Joanne and I will plant roots. And because I think that Akron community is a phenomenal community, and the city of Akron, the actual government itself is just, I think it's second to none, because the work that they're doing, leaning in to some very difficult conversations and leading in this area, for me, is a demonstration of how professional it is, and a community that, again, I really want to be part of. So, Coach, the answer to the question is yes, I will live in the city of Akron, and I think it is very important that the chief live in the city of Akron.
Thank you. Deputy Commissioner Sullivan.
The answer is unequivocal yes. I've always lived in the city of Philadelphia. Being a police chief is a 24/7 job. And when something goes wrong, when there's a problem, you need to be on scene within minutes. And living in the city affords you that opportunity. It also sends a very important message. I mean, if I was honored enough to be the police chief for the city of Akron, I could not imagine sending a message of not living in the city of Akron. Thirdly, from a personal standpoint, there's a whole ton of reasons to want to live in the city of Akron. You've got a beautiful city. You've got a growing city. It's going places. I just would not have ever considered anything else. And it certainly is. Being a police chief, as I said before, is a 24/7 commitment. And the mayor, city council, and most of all the citizens of Akron have a right to expect that when something is wrong, that you're not coming in an hour out. So I most certainly look forward to planting roots in Akron and making Akron my home.
Thank you. Deputy Chief Davis.
Well, of course, it would be my commitment to live in the city of Akron. And I think for me, it's a matter of commitment. If I'm your police chief, I need to demonstrate to you that I'm committed to the city that the organization serves, committed to the organization. And I can't think of a more meaningful way of showing that commitment than sending my kids to school with your kids, maybe living in your neighborhood, and being part of the community where I am chief. I have always believed that a chief of police should live in the city where they serve. I am a little reluctant to impose that requirement on everyone in the organization, and I'll tell you why. And it's based on my own experience here in Portland, which is another one of those cities that's very expensive to live in. But it's also, we have some I can think of one of my best command officers whose passion outside of work is horses, and you can't afford horse property in Portland. That would be prohibitively expensive for what a commander makes. So that's where I will always have that little bit of reluctance on requiring that of everyone in the organization. But for the police chief, it's an absolute that the chief, with the role that they have, should live in the city and demonstrate that solid commitment to the city, to the organization that serves it, and to all of the communities that make up the city. And the last thing I'll say on this is there's a practical matter as well, because my style is to be out in the community a lot. And if I'm living in the community, then I'm a lot closer to where I'm going to be most of the time anyway.
Thank you for that. And Chief Hawkins.
Without a doubt, the same answer that we've gotten from the other three candidates. I started out in police work in the early 1990s. And as soon as I was hired in the police department in Southfield, Michigan, I moved to that city as an officer. And this was during a time when officers did not want to live in the city in which they were policing. There's safety concerns. They're worried about privacy issues and things like that. And it was just always important to me as an officer to be in the city. When I was later promoted to chief, I remained in that city. I think it's important for the chief to be there. And when I was hired as the chief in Albany, I immediately moved to Albany. It's critically important that happens. It's like some of the other candidates have mentioned, it's the symbolism of it. It's the messaging that we send. And absolutely, if I'm the chief in Akron, I'll absolutely move to the city of Akron.
Thank you for that answer. Next question. There has been a lot of conversation happening in Akron around police oversight. Mayor Horgan has appointed a racial equity and social justice task force to make recommendations by the end of the year. Whoever is the next chief will be operating under a new and hopefully improved civilian oversight model based on those recommendations. What are your experiences with or your opinions about civilian oversight boards and other forms of citizen oversight of police? And I'm going to start with Deputy Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes, thank you. In Philadelphia, I worked very closely with the Police Advisory Commission. The director was Mr. Hans Manius. We had an outstanding relationship. I really valued the input. I valued the criticism. I valued the suggestions on how to make things better. The director sat on the Firearms Review Board, had input in our evaluation of all police discharge of firearms, which brought a really important perspective to the board. And those of us who have been in law enforcement for a long time, we can get kind of pigeonholed into our view of things. And more importantly, he brought a sentinel review aspect to that process. And what I mean by that is there is no such thing as a good police shooting. That doesn't exist. It's violence, and then when it occurs in a community, it may be unfortunately have been necessary, it may be lawful, but it has still traumatized that community and the children inside that community. Even when we conducted the investigation and dealt with the legal issues and the internal policy issues, we need to look at every critical incident like a police shooting, and every critical incident has a negative impact on the community, and go back from the very beginning, Was there a step that we could have intervened? Was there a different approach that we could have taken? Was some opportunity had missed that would have prevented us from being at this moment? These are the type of concepts that you receive when you have that type of cooperation and a good relationship. You should expect full cooperation. It should be obviously quite report only to the mayor and be independent of the police department. But that doesn't mean that we don't work cooperatively together. We don't share information. And I look forward to see the exact structure of that is decided upon. But one thing I can assure you, whatever that structure is, that director will find himself an excellent partner in myself if I am chosen as the next police chief for Akron.
Thank you very much. And I'm gonna go to Chief Hawkins, same question.
Police oversight, civilian police review boards, and those types of boards, whether we like it or not in law enforcement, that's the future. That's where we're going. That's the natural evolution of it. And it's frustrating for many of us who have been in law enforcement for so long and have not had that type of partnerships and oversight, or whatever we want to call it, with these types of boards. It's frustrating because we've done it our way for so long. But with this reform movement and this reimagining movement that we're seeing, not just in Albany and not just in Akron and not just in other places, but across this country, it's inevitable that law enforcement leaders are going to have to embrace this concept of some sort of oversight with our agencies. And in most cases, it'll be some sort of civilian oversight. It's just the reality. Now the question is what will this iteration of change in terms of this oversight look like? How will this impact, our agencies? Because we got to remember, in New York and in Michigan and in Ohio, we have very strong police union with very solid collective bargaining agreements that govern things like wages, benefits, and discipline, and how this discipline is administered and the process for discipline. And so we've got to make sure that as we move towards this natural evolution, that we don't close out, our union representatives, the other officers who are going to be impacted by this discipline. Now, the answer to the question, my answer is, I think fundamentally, I'm on board with having an independent organization that analyzes and assesses police activity. I think it's a good thing to have another set of eyes, to have somebody, to have some other entity that can look at these things and, at the very least, give the police chief some advice and a perspective on some of the things that we're dealing with as it pertains to discipline and other matters within our police departments.
Thank you very much, Chief Hawkins. We'll go over next to Chief Milet.
Coach, when I joined in 1989, my brothers before me, my father before them, for many years, the only departments that had civilian oversight were those that had issues of corruption or a proven track record to where the department had failed in their responsibility to hold their employees accountable. Oversight was usually synonymous with a consent decree. Why? Because back then, in most communities, what came out of an officer's mouth and the police department itself had great trust in the community, and we were always given the benefit of the doubt. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, that's changed. And it's not enough that, we say one thing, people want proof, and people want to know that there is somebody, an independent of us, that is looking at what we're doing and sharing information transparently, with a level of transparency. They want evidence and they want to know the truth. So more and more cities are adopting civilian oversight boards. Now, in its basic form, police departments have always been answerable to oversight through the community directly, and then the elected officials, city councils, mayors. But what we're seeing now is becoming more and more normal for police departments to have some level of civilian oversight. Now, there's different models. And I think the departments that demonstrate that they're engaged in corruption or they have a track record of failing in their duties and responsibilities, that oversight should be pretty solid, stringent and tight. But for others where that doesn't exist, there's different models. So it all depends on the city. It all depends on the model. In Bellevue, we're exploring that. We're looking at it very closely, working with civil rights groups and others, and the unions. Unions got to be involved in it, and they have to understand what the benefit to them is. So when we're telling the story of a use of force, having an independent group come over and say, "Yep, that's exactly what happened," it benefits the officer. If I'm selected chief of police in Akron, I'm going to work closely with Mr. Young. I'm glad that the Akron City Council changed the policies, is given them more access and more collaborative approach with the police auditor.
Thank you, Chief. And also Deputy Chief Davis.
Yeah, thank you. And community oversight of policing is something actually I have a lot of experience with, because here in Portland, we have been on the cutting edge nationally of community police oversight for a very long time. And there are two places where I believe the community oversight adds value to the police department. One is the more traditional concept of independent oversight of the complaint and discipline processes. And we have a very long-standing relationship with our own independent police review, having worked in internal affairs and having on the ground, so to speak, worked day in and day out with them. I have seen where that type of oversight actually adds to people's trust in the process, not only in the community, but also inside the organization. And I have good news for the police profession about independent oversight, that it is actually a good thing as long as it is implemented thoughtfully, which I see happening in Akron. But the other place that we don't talk about as much, that I think there is a lot of room for independent oversight to add value, is in more of the operations of the police department. And we're limited for time, so I'll give you an example. I was recently tasked with coming up with a gun violence reduction plan here in the city of Portland. And we needed to make sure we did not create a lot of collateral damage in the community in terms of trust, while still addressing a pretty serious gun violence problem. And so the model that I developed, and which we are in the process of implementing now, is one where we actually have community oversight of that effort, where there is, we call it a community oversight group for the patrol function of gun violence interdiction and reduction. And we're in the process of developing this. The goal will be for that group and the officers that we select for this unit to collaborate on that problem, come up with police strategies that are acceptable to the community, and then go out and implement those strategies. And this oversight group will monitor to make sure we don't have disparities and that we're actually making an impact on the problem that we're trying to solve. So it doesn't only add value in terms of your complaint and discipline process, although it certainly does there as well.
Thank you, everyone. This next question is going to come from one of our citizens here in Akron. The citizen's name is Rob. Rob is asking this question, and I want to start with you, Chief Milet, because you mentioned in your opening about the importance of community policing. His question is this: what would you do to change the relationships between the Akron Police Department and many segments of the community, from one that is adversarial and lacks trust to one that is cooperative partnership based on mutual trust? And I'm going to go ahead and name at least a few of those segments, okay? So the one segment I want to mention is the youth. I think that's very important. The next segment in our community are African Americans. The next segment in our community, I believe, is our faith community as a whole. So how do we help to repair the relationship between the Akron Police Department and those segments within our community that is not one of adversarial and lacks trust, but one that is cooperative partnership based on a mutual trust? And I'm going to start with you, Chief Mallet.
That's a great question, Coach. Thank you. And thank you for the citizen who who shared that question. It's going to be part of the entry into the Akron in listening, is trying to find out exactly what's contributing to those tensions between those specific communities and the police. You know, in Bellevue, you know, and I'm not saying Bellevue is Akron because it's not, they're two totally different cities, where there's some similarities. But what we did in Bellevue is we reached out to the communities, specifically communities of color, and asked them what we were doing that was failing them. And based on the responses that we got, because my officers want to serve, and I'm pretty convinced that based on the research that I've done, that the Akron officers also want to serve and serve effectively. Breaking down the barriers of communication. One of the things that we implemented in Bellevue was I commissioned 7 advisory councils to the chief of police based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and religion. So I have an African-American advisory council. We met and have been meeting quite a bit over the last 6 years. Together, we've identified those issues that create mistrust in the African-American community itself. And then we worked on that as a police department. I shared the information with my employees, and collectively we came up with efforts and initiatives to get out there and start building that trust. And again, this question is a very, very important question, and it requires really more than 2 minutes of a response, because then you have the whole issue of youth. The youth are on the move, folks, and you all know that. And they are challenging police departments across the nation because they're not satisfied with our performance. And so, again, interacting with youth, listening to them, and trying to connect with them where they are, and finding ways to serve that population. And coach, the faith-based groups, they're essential. They've got to be present. And that is one of the most foundational relationships that a police department must have in the community, because most people are going to church. And you know, you build those relationships. And I know I'm over my 2 minutes, so I wish I could spend more time on this, because that question by itself is a very important one.
Appreciate that. And thanks for staying to the time as much as you can. I
Yes,
know
sir.
these are really deep and really ever growing and unfolding questions. Deputy Chief Davis, I'm coming to you now with the question, because in your opening statement, you talked about we are at a crossroads. And I believe this question represents those crossroads that we're in. So tell us, how would you go about really diving into the different segments of our community to help to rebuild that trust?
Well, yes, sir. And this question really describes, I think, probably the highest priority of your next police chief. And I think there are several concrete steps that we need to take to start to rebuild that trust. And I think one of the first steps is to acknowledge where harm has been done in the past, in history. And, you know, I'm always surprised how reluctant a lot of us in the policing profession are to just sit down with people and say, you know what, I'm sorry that my profession had that impact on you, and I want to make it right. And I think it starts with that acknowledgement. I am a big believer in truth and reconciliation processes. That is a very large project, and you have to take that on with a lot of thought and a lot of community involvement. But I think that's another thing that I would at least like to explore. That's something that you really need to be in the community for a while and see how ready it is in the community and in the department for a process like that has been done elsewhere. But the places where it has been done, like in Stockton, California, for example, that process makes a huge difference in terms of community trust, because it starts by just acknowledging the past. Community involvement in all aspects of the department. And I believe in giving the community opportunities to invest in us, as well as us investing in the community and in community policing and outreach efforts. But why not have community members, or for example, I have pastors that come in and teach advanced academy classes. So as we socialize new officers into the Portland Police Bureau, so that we're not just socializing them into the police bureau, we're socializing them into the community of Portland. Youth outreach, I think you have some tremendous opportunities there in terms of the proposal for a path to law enforcement. I would probably rename it to path to policing. But that's a huge opportunity there to engage youth and have them be able to see themselves as members of your organization someday. It makes a tremendous difference, and I have some experience I can talk about a little later with that. But again, that's a high-level summary in 2 minutes of something that I could go on and on about. But thank you for the question. I think that's one of the main priorities.
Thank you so much. And Chief Hawkins, I'm going to come to you next.
Without a doubt, that is, like Chris said, one of the probably the main priority in our country right now in policing. You know, I got into policing in 1990, and it was shortly thereafter we had the Rodney King incident in Los Angeles. And now, as a police chief, 30 years later, you know, I'm experiencing the aftermath of the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis. And one of the things that has been a frustration for me over my 30 years in this profession is that the same types of outrage and pain and hurt that was expressed by members, particularly of the African-American community back in the early 1990s, is the same outrage and pain and hurt that's being expressed now 30 years later after George Floyd. So it tells you that, you know, the crux of this question is about those relationships. Why do we still have these gaps in terms of relations between police and members of our minority communities, between police and members of our youth, between police and members of our faith-based community? And so we've got to, at the very least, as it was mentioned before, we've got to understand that it is a problem, that we do a lot of things well in law enforcement. We have the most conscientious and hardworking people that are police officers that you'll see in any industry in this country. You know, young men and women who will do things to save a piece of property that's been stolen from somebody, and they'll jump a fence and blow out a knee and be disabled. You know, so these are some great people, but there are some things that we can do better. And one of the things that we can do better is with our relationships with our youth and our African-American community. And so one of the things that we have to do when you talk about changing relationships, we have to see what those relationships are. Now, fortunately, in the city of Albany, the relationships are great. The ethic in terms of knowing that we need to do this was there. And so I simply had to support all those things that were going well, and then add to those with some things like a police cadet program, with a pastors on patrol program, with meeting with the African-American clergy on a regular basis. And so incorporating those things into what is already being done in great organizations, that's what has to be done in the city of Akron. You know, there's some great things being done in this police department and in this community. What can the new chief do to preserve those things that are being done great in these areas that we just discussed, and then add to them, add value to what's already there?
Thank you so much, Chief Hawkins. And Deputy Commissioner Sullivan.
Thank you, Coach. And I'm going to go back and paraphrase Charles Ramsey as I start out. You know, he made a statement that, you know, you can't keep saying it's a few bad apples. At some point, you got to turn around and say it's time to cut it down and build a new tree. And I think that's what we're doing right now, or I should say plant a new tree. There's a lot of things we have to start over. We have to reduce violence while at the same time restoring confidence. The public's confidence in the police. And so I like to start from the basic and move forward. It begins with the way that we train. And one of the things that I was fortunate enough to do, I took the first group of Philadelphia police cadets down to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., so they could understand the role that the police had in the Holocaust. And I don't mind admitting that I really did not have that knowledge myself. It was a life-changing experience for all of us. And we now do the same thing with the African-American Museum here in Philadelphia. In Chicago, we take recruits out to different communities that they're going to police and have returning citizens and members of the community talk about their particular communities, their cultures, their practices. So there's a level of understanding there. And then it's the manner in which we police. It's that everyday interaction that most people have with the police that matters the most. We can run all the great community policing programs in the world, and we should and we shall. But they will mean nothing if officers, if citizens, and especially citizens of color, are not treated with respect, or not treated in a dignified manner when they come to the window for police service, when the police come to their house, let alone in more severe situations. The other side, you talk, Coach, specifically about youth, and that's something I have a lot of experience in as the president of a children's charity, and some of the programs that we promote, the Police Youth Alliance program, creating interaction between local youth and their local police officers, skills and drills program that we support, that started over the killing of a 15-year-old that was playing basketball when the basketball court was sprayed with gunfire. But one of the things that we do know is that there are too many youth that are involved in these crimes, and there are way too many youth that are the victims of these crimes. One of the strategies that we know works, we empirically know it works, it's evidence-based, is that jobs. When you give a young man or a young woman a job, you give them purpose, you give them pride, you give them the ability to provide for their basic needs. And I don't think many people really understand the level of poverty that exists in cities like Philadelphia, how that contributes to crime, and how if you're not addressing those issues, that policing alone is not going to put an end to the violence. It's good policing, it's constitutional policing, working in concert with violence interrupters, with nonprofits, with community leaders, with providing young people with opportunity, providing them with life skills, providing them with positive activities. And this is one of the reasons we saw the rise in juvenile crime and juvenile victimizations. And it's here in Philadelphia. It's the way that we engage with the community. It's very important that communities, especially communities of color, feel that they have input into the policies and the practices that impact them, that they have a say in the way that their communities are policed. You have low clearance rates, you have low trust, and you're not going to fix that clearance rate until you fix that trust.
Thank you very much. And we're getting to the point where, time is going to be wrapping up. So I'm going to just, be intentional about asking questions to two of you guys and giving two of you different questions. Okay. So just be prepared for that. Currently in the state of Ohio, barbers and cosmetologists are required to complete more hours of training prior to licensing than law enforcement officers. Do you believe police academies should be required to provide more training for police officers? And how will you ensure that Akron Police Department is proactive in addressing training deficiencies as opposed to reactive? And I'm going to pose this question first to Deputy Chief Davis.
Well, thank you. And in a word, yes. The state, in terms of its training requirements to certified police officers, sets the floor, but we can always exceed that. And this is one of the places where I will just let you know in advance, full disclosure, that if I become your police chief, I am going to be seeking to make big investments in officer training. And not just training, because we focus on training. Training and education are two different things. There is training that is necessary for somebody to be a police officer, but training teaches someone to perform a task. What I believe very firmly we need more of in our socialization of police officers and in their ongoing training is education, which is a broader thing, and it equips people with a set of tools that they can apply to a wide variety of situations. Now, I believe that one of the mistakes that we've made as a profession over a very long time has been that we focus on training, and that training tends to focus on tactics or a manipulation of a piece of equipment. Well, then we have an issue like racial inequities and stops, or applying an equity lens to policing, and we try to roll that out with training as if we are teaching somebody to do a task. It's a broader concept of education that I think we need to look at that as. But I will tell you that here in our organization, we add almost as much advanced academy training to a new recruit's training as they go through in the state's basic academy. We don't run our own police academies in Oregon. And we make big investments in ongoing in-service training and education on these big issues. And it pays off in terms of better outcomes out in the community.
Okay. Chief Hawkins, same question.
Absolutely. And, you know, in Albany, we go vastly above what's minimally required for our police officers. We run our own in-house academy. And so it's not just the amount of training that these recruits get, but it's the type of training. And that type of training must be dependent on the community. What is the community like? What are the expectations of each community? Every community is different in terms of the expectations. And so it's important for communities and for police departments to understand what the communities want in their police officers. And that's one thing that Albany has done very, very well, great. And this was done before I got there. And that's a model that I think should be replicated in cities across the country. And, you know, obviously there's some cost constraints associated with that, because in order to go well above what's minimally required, you know, you have to have more staffing and more resources in order to do so. But if that is, if those aren't barriers, then absolutely. And another thing that goes along with training also is, you know, we just can't put people into training, give them more training, better training, and expect that we're going to have better police officers. It's about the type of people that we're putting in there. Who are we recruiting? How are we recruiting? And, you know, what types, you know, and it goes beyond, you know, years and years ago, you had to have a military background, or you had to have people who were relatives who were police officers in order to get in. But now we really need to diversify the people that we're putting in our academies. People who have diverse experiences, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, life experiences. You know, put a diverse group of people into our academies, give them more training, give them training with more substance that is tailored to the community of which they're serving. And I think that we're on the way to having a better product, producing a better product in terms of the officers that are serving these unique communities that we have across America.
Thank you. New question for Deputy Commissioner Sullivan and also Chief Milet. The question is this: do you support the National George Floyd Justice in Policing Act? Why or why not? And I'm going to start with you, Deputy Commissioner Sullivan. You're muted, Deputy. Still muted.
Yeah, my apologies. I do, and because it dovetails perfectly with the conversation that we just had. One of the things that it does, it sets a baseline for training of police officers in America, and that's one of the things we desperately need. Standardization. We have 17,000 plus police departments in America, over 900,000 law enforcement officers, and they're all being trained and supervised at a varying level, to varying standards, and it's certainly a major problem within our profession. And as well as the other parts of the bill in terms of banning chokeholds, limiting no-knock warrants, limiting liability. And these are all positive things. These are things that we should support, that I will continue to support. But along with that, we see the opportunity here now to take our curriculums and change them based on the funding that will come with that type of money, especially for smaller police departments. But everything within that act that I have seen and that I have read, I think comports perfectly with the department that wants to reform itself, that wants a guideline. But to me, that's a baseline for the Akron Police Department. In fact, I think the Akron Police Department is probably in pretty much in compliance with most of that act. Now it's for people like myself to work with the community and to work with my executive staff and personnel at all levels of the department, to then take that and then improve upon that and police in Akron to a higher standard in terms of our training, in terms of our policies, making sure that they're national best practices, making sure that our training reflects that life, the sanctity of human life is a priority, meaning that we spend as much time learning de-escalation as we do firing our weapons on the range. Both are important, but they have to be seen as equally important. Our job is to save lives.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. And Chief Malik.
Thank you, Coach. I've reviewed the bill, the act, and there's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts in it. The vast majority of the content that's in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, I also agree with. Having a national registry, standardizing training is very, very important. And just if I can weigh in just on that last conversation, I agree with my colleagues on training, but you know what? Derek Chauvin, he wasn't trained to do what he did in Minneapolis. So to Chief Hawkins' point, it's who you're hiring, and it's also the accountability piece that is the responsibility of the police department, that if anything surfaces, you need to deal with it quickly to eliminate behavior like that. Getting back onto this, the only, folks, I am always open and honest, and that's if I'm selected as your chief of police, you will never have to doubt anything that I say, because what I say is what I mean. The only thing that gives me pause is when we start talking about eliminating qualified immunity. We expect and we ask these men and women to go out and serve the public in some really, really dangerous situations. And if an officer is acting with malice in their heart, or with hatred, or bias, or racism, then yeah, then they should be punished both criminally and civilly. But when we start talking about an officer that is doing the right thing for the right reasons, and we start opening up this door for people to go after them civilly, that will have a chilling effect on policing and people's willingness to join our profession. We're already starting to see that. The state of Washington was considering eliminating qualified immunity. I'm glad that they didn't. They're already in Washington, there's already provisions that if an officer acts with malice or with hatred, then yes, they subject themselves to the civil process. But the vast majority of things that are in the Policing Act, I agree with and I support.
Thank you so much. I want to come back to you, Chief Hawkins, because you just brought this up. So my question to you is this: what is your strategy for recruiting minorities and the hiring process?
When I got into law enforcement 30 years ago as a young Black man, I had some hesitancy. I heard the stories that, my parents had given me the story that a lot of young Black kids get about how to survive encounters with the police. I'd heard I hadn't had a lot of personal negative interactions, but not a lot of positive either. And I'd heard a lot of negative things about policing. And so right now, we've got a twofold challenge in law enforcement. First of all, our numbers are down overall. Years and years ago, we all of us on this panel, we've got stories of how there were thousands of people who put in for police jobs, and it's very competitive. And now we only get hundreds putting in for police jobs. So that's the first challenge. But the other challenge is, that problem is exacerbated with respect to minorities, because it's even lower now with minorities. And so we've got a problem. And I think my personal opinion is that this reform and reimagining process that communities across the country, including Akron, are going through right now is going to change the game in terms of the recruitment, particularly of minorities into police work. Because what this does, it signals to these young African-American men and women that things are different. Akron produced a formal document about reform in the communities. Albany produced a formal document. Other communities are doing this. And now these young African-American men and women see that this is not their parents' police department. Things are different. There's some formalization of the culture change in these police departments, and they feel now that they can come in and make a difference. There was a hesitancy before with the old police department. We reach out and tell these young men and women that, come join us. You can have a pathway to being successful. You can help us engage and all these other things. But they're hearing that, but with in their hearts, what they're thinking is, no, this is the same old place. So my short answer to this question is reforming and in this whole transforming and reimagining that we're going through with policing will send a strong signal to African Americans, but to all young men and women in general, that things are different in policing. This is an industry now that is willing to change, an industry that has some versatility and flexibility and an openness to bringing in new ideas.
I appreciate that, Chief Hawkins. Chief Milet, same question.
Thank you, Coach, for the question. You know, the question that you asked me earlier about connecting with the community in Akron, where there's community wants to see themselves in their police officers, and focusing on diversity hiring is one of the biggest priorities for chiefs, or it should be anyway. At least it is for me in the city of Bellevue. What I've done in the city of Bellevue is I made increasing diversity a priority. And then I put my money where my mouth was. And I appointed a recruiter whose focus was to increase diversity hiring. I'm proud to say over the last 6 years, every year that I've been serving as chief, we have increased diversity in the police department every single year. How did we do it? I explained to my employees all of the vast benefits of having a diverse workforce. And then I also rejected flat out any sort of correlation about adding diversity and this perception that some held that you're going to be lowering standards. I rejected that flat out and explained the reasons why. Working with our 3 unions, we adjusted our hiring practices, and where we found actually a systemic racist issue in our hiring practice, we eliminated it and we corrected it, we repaired it. I used and always leveraged the 7 advisory councils to the chief. They have helped in our recruitment effort. I've recruited and added diversity in my command staff, in my first line supervisor level. It's important, folks. The people want to see themselves in their police officers, and that will also lead to trust. Very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an important question, so I want our 2 other candidates also to answer the question as well. This is too important just to present it to 2 of you. So I'm gonna go next to you, Deputy Chief Davis.
I was hoping you were going to let us answer this question, because this is another one of those fundamental issues in our profession right now. I think at the high level, the work that we will do in terms of building trust in the community will help with the reluctance, especially in communities of color, to take the test and come and be a police officer. But really, to get a little bit more specific, I think we need to be very thoughtful about the message that we send about who we are as police, especially in our recruiting message, but across the board. And, you know, a lot of times we tend in our public messaging, when we talk about the good things that we do in policing, we talk about the things that appeal to us, not realizing that just like our communities are very diverse, police work is actually a very diverse profession. There are all kinds of places, especially in a larger police department like Akron, where you can find your unique spot in that organization. And so that's the message I think we need to communicate in our recruiting, is that there's a place for you on our team. And look at all of these different ways that you can serve your community as an Akron police officer. I will tell you that one of the first things that I would do as your chief is evaluate the entire recruiting and hiring process and look for those places where we have disproportionate impacts on particular groups, where we, for example, we found some places in our hiring process when we did this where we were washing out women and people of color for no reasons connected to their actual suitability to be police officers. And when we modified those processes, we didn't reduce our standards, but we did increase the number of really high quality people we were able to bring into the organization. And we were able to diversify our hiring classes significantly through some of those efforts. So that is another one of those just critical issues in the profession right now.
Thank you. And Deputy Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes, Coach. When I was the chief of training for the Philadelphia Police Department, I was also a board member of the Municipal Police Officers Training Commission, setting standards in Pennsylvania. And we were not meeting our diversity goals. We weren't even coming close. And one of the things that I looked into, when we talked to our background investigators, they almost felt like they were almost hired guns. They were kind of like, felt that they were being measured by how many people they eliminated. And we had to sit them down and explain to them, your job is not to eliminate people. Your job is to get qualified candidates through and not be eliminating people for ridiculous reasons. The other thing, we looked at the steps in the hiring process. It was completely backwards. We looked at those steps that were impacting women and impacting applicants of color. One of the things was a written test. We would take a written test, and when we had it evaluated by academia, they said a lot of the questions in there were just not fair questions for all applicants. The written test was a predictor of 0. We got rid of the written test. The other one was financials. Listen, one thing we know, it's not a level playing field out there for everyone. So not everyone's going to have the same at the income ratio. Doesn't mean someone doesn't pay their bills, that they shouldn't be a police officer. When you really look at this and you make sure that in those steps that people are failing the most, you put those steps up front so that if they fail once, they can come back a second time or even a third time. By doing all these things, by making sure that the requirements to be a police officer are job related, they're fair to everyone, making sure that the steps in the process are conducted in a fair and proper fashion. But then also it's about, if you're really serious about this, where are you doing your recruiting at? Are you going to Black colleges and universities? Are you going to ethnic events? Are you really, really in an aggressive fashion, casting a wide net, but also always looking at your homegrown talent first? Programs out there, 30 by 30, to make sure that 30% of all recruit classes by 2030 are 30% female. National Organization of Black Law Enforcement has just begun the LEAD program. That is a program to prepare minority applicants to be successful in the application process, community engagement through mentoring and curriculum assistance. But these are just some of the, I would certainly be reaching out to both of those programs to help us in Akron, as well as, once again, listening to the community and having them tell me what part of this process you think is, number one, unattractive to minority candidates, and number two, unfair to minority candidates, and start fixing the problem.
I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your very, I think, honest and candid answers to some of these questions. We're coming now to the close of our Q&A portion of our program tonight. We're going to move into closing statements from each of our finalists. And this is kind of on my heart. It didn't come up through this, but I would love if you all could touch on it, even in your closing statements. COVID-19 has been kind of, if you will, talked about or labeled as the great revealer. And I think one of the things it has revealed within our society is the importance of mental health and awareness, reducing the stigma of a mental health disorder, but also raising the awareness of one. You all work in law enforcement. You've been patrol cops yourself. You handle a large group and a large department of men and women who are out each and every day risking their lives. Just mention briefly in your closing statements anything that you're currently doing as a result to mental health training for your departments, for the men and the women that you oversee as chief of Akron. And so we're in our closing statement. So if that can be touched upon, I'd appreciate it. If not, I understand it. But it's just very important, I think, where we are right now within our society, especially within Akron, because we really push a lot of the awareness of a mental health disorder within our community. And it'd be great to see sometimes in that engagement that our officer may have with a citizen, understanding that that may be a role in some of that behavior, I think would be beneficial not only to the officer, but also to the citizen at hand. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm just going to go and call on each and every one of you to give your closing statement. And right now I'm going to start with Deputy Chief Davis.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll zoom in on mental health and then zoom out in my conclusion if I can. We do a lot to deal with this issue here in Portland. We have all of our officers attend crisis intervention training. It is not just a specialty in our organization. There's an add-on even above that that is a voluntary training, but And I am a big believer in co-responder models, in alternative response models where appropriate to deal with folks in mental health crisis besides police. But no matter what we do, police officers will always find themselves coming into contact with people experiencing mental health crisis. And so it is critical for us to make sure that we equip our officers with the tools to do exactly what you said, sir, which is to realize when what they're really dealing with is a mental health issue. Another big challenge is then having follow-on resources that those officers can refer people to deal with the actual problem they're having, rather than putting people in the criminal justice system, where we know what that tends to do is make mental health problems even worse. Also on that topic, though, I think we need to be thoughtful about the mental health of our employees as well, because it's a difficult job. And inside the organization, we need to reduce that traditional stigma about recognizing when you need some help, and we need to lift people up and encourage them and provide them ways of getting help, sometimes for their own issues that you develop in the course of a career in the police service. I'll close by saying this. I believe that the essence of leadership really is vision. And I believe that this is a time in our profession. I believe it's a time in Akron. I believe it's a time in every police department in our country where that's what we need. We need to come together with our communities and our police departments. They are not two separate things. Your police department is part of your community, and we need to come together as a community, develop that shared vision for what public safety service looks like in the future, take stock of where we are now and where we've got gaps where we need to work. And then we need to embark together upon that journey in a way that brings everyone along. Police reform, as I like to say, is not something that we will do successfully to police departments and police officers. It is something that we will do with them. And so I humbly ask you now in your community for the opportunity to come and join you in this work. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
And Chief Milet.
Thank you, Coach. I'll also tackle the mental health question as well. This part of our community, these human beings that we as a police department provide services to, and we as a community should wrap our arms around, need special care and a special approach. I also believe in the co-responder approach. We as a police department, as a police profession, have inherited a lot of things over periods of time. And that's where reimagining policing we really need to dig deep on those things that we've inherited that really we're not the best equipped and best prepared and the best group to respond to the individual's need. And this is one of those issues. People dealing with mental health issues in crisis and homelessness. In the city of Bellevue, we have launched a co-responder program. We've identified officers, put them in plain clothes, have given them additional training. All of our officers in the city of Bellevue are CIT trained. They have all received training on de-escalation. It's not just a one-shot deal. This is training that is continual training. And our officers it's called the Community Crisis Action Team. And it partners a police officer with the mental health professional. And when we show up, the officers in plain clothes, because we know that for some, the uniform will actually trigger people into further crisis. So eliminating the uniform and building the relationships there and getting the person the assistance that they need. Because many times, at least in my career, we didn't have any place to take people. So we put them in jail. And that's not the place where they need to be. So we're working hard to serve that population. And I believe Akron is as well. And Coach, again, if I'm selected to be the next chief of police, I promise you we will continue to build those relationships with the nonprofit organizations and all of the mental health professionals so we can together provide the services that are needed. Now, I know I've probably taken up most of my 2 minutes, So if you will bear with me a little bit, I want to thank all of you, the Akron community, for allowing my colleagues and I to spend some time with you today and present ourselves to you. I am applying for the position of Chief of Police for personal and professional reasons. Professionally, I think there's a lot of opportunity to continue to build upon the successes of the city of Akron. Akron is leaning into some really heavy issues and conversations. The Reimagining Steering Committee, the Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force. There's a lot of exciting things that are occurring and are coming down the pike. I know that that last group is going to be reporting out in December, and I'd like to be part of that. During my adult life, my faith and my values have guided me in my personal and professional life. If given the opportunity to serve as your next Chief of Police, I will work hard to earn your trust and confidence. I am ready to lead you, the men and women of the Akron Police Department. I've got a lot of experience, but things need to be customized to the needs of Akron. And I've successfully done that in two different organizations. So, okay, Coach, I'm done.
Chief. I appreciate you, Chief. Deputy Commissioner Sullivan, closing thoughts.
I'm going to try to stay at 2 minutes. So I'm going to roll.
I appreciate that.
As the Chief of Homeland Security, the one thing that I was very proud of is how we use the principles of de-escalation and how we work so closely with mental health officials to literally resolve hundreds of crises without any use of force or a very minimal use of force and no use of deadly force. I believe in those principles. I've lived those principles and I promoted those principles. And when I was promoted as Deputy Commissioner, I brought those principles to the thousands of officers in the patrol division and made them see too that does work. And then partnerships with mental health, partnerships with homeless services, partnerships with social services providing assistance to substance dependent populations. These are things that work. The police want this help. We've always wanted this help. We're glad to get it. The alternative response models are the future, and they should be the future. There has to be a multi-tiered response because, as one of my colleagues said, we're always going to have police officers that are going to be the first one to encounter someone with a mental health, having a mental health crisis. And they have to have the skills to do no harm, but they also have to have the resources that they can call. They have to have the training to do no harm. So, and also, as Chris said, it's important to make sure that officer is also someone who has personal wellness because they have a department that has supported that and ensured that they were prepared to deal with a situation like that. So again, I say to you, thank you, Coach. And I hope that if I am so lucky as to become the next chief of the Akron Police Department, that the coach will be there to support me and to advise me, as well as the larger community in Akron. And Mayor, thank you, and members of City Council, members of the Police Department in Akron, and the citizens of Akron, thank you for the opportunity you've given me here today to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chief Hawkins.
Well, thank you. And much like the other panelists talked about, crisis intervention training is extremely important. We get our officers, our recruits at the very outset in the academy, they get this training. So this whole awareness of this issue is instilled in our recruits at a very early stage of their career. And this is continuing education as well. And, we've got mobile crisis teams. But one of the most important things, I think the most impactful thing that's happening with us, and that will happen in Akron, because Akron is going through a similar path with this, is the police reform and collaboration movement. Because I know in Albany, one of the recommendations from our community that's codified now in this document is that we look at how we handle mental health in a different way. That we have an awareness that there's been some harm and some trauma that's been inflicted on individuals who are under mental health crises over the years by police officers. And it's not because police officers are bad. And it's not that they were trying to do the wrong thing. It's just that, these are very volatile situations. And so can we have less contact between officers and individuals who are under a mental health crisis? And so we're in the process right now of developing plans with our community. It's important when we're doing things like this that we don't impose a strategy on our community, especially our mental health community with something like this, that we do this in collaboration. And we're doing it the right way. And Akron is doing it the right way. And so I think as we move forward, working with the community through these reform collaboration plans is going to help us out tremendously as it pertains to addressing issues of mental health and substance abuse and homelessness and some of these other social problems that we're dealing with. And as we close, I too thank the members of the Akron community, the elected officials. Coach, we thank you for all you've done tonight. I enjoyed listening to my panelists. There's some extremely talented individuals that are being considered for this chief's position in Akron, and it's an honor to be a part of this process amongst these talented individuals. And I'll just say that to me, as we move into this new chapter in law enforcement, because Deputy Chief Davis said it, I think he was spot on. We are at a pivotal point. What we're seeing right now is much different than anything that I've seen in my 30 plus years in law enforcement. I've been through the Rodney Kings and some of these other major incidents involving police and members of our community. But there's a momentum with this change that is unlike anything that I've ever seen. And so change is coming. And so the question is, what type of leaders do we want in these organizations to help our communities navigate this change? And when I say community, I mean the people who reside in those communities and our officers. We have some great officers in our place, officers who want to do the right thing. And so it's incumbent upon us as leaders to help our officers understand that reform and reimagination and transforming, those are not bad words. It's just the natural evolution of change. And
I'm going to leave you right there. I'm going to leave right there, Chief Alton. That was a great close. I will stop you right there. Sorry to have to cut you off, but I do have to turn it back over to Ellen at this time. And so again, thank you all so much for your time and also your answers.
Thank you, Coach.
Thank you, Coach Boyd, and thank you very much to each of our candidates for sharing your time and perspective with us this evening. Finally, thank you so much to all of our viewers at home and to those of you who submitted questions. We've been talking all night about the importance of listening to the community, and we hope that tonight was just the beginning of a relationship between our future Chief of Police and the Akron citizens. So if you have any feedback about tonight's event, we ask that you would please email that to apdchiefsearch@akronohio.gov, or you can call the Mayor's Action Center that's 330-375-2311. And for anyone who's engaging with us on social media, you can share your reactions with the hashtag APDChiefSearch. On behalf of Mayor Dan Horgan and all of us here at City Hall, thank you and have a safe evening. This concludes our live stream of the Akron Police Chief Community Town Hall.